I know you're not going to do income tax cuts yourself in this campaign. Are there any other tax cuts, instant asset write-off things, anything like that that we can look forward to?
Well, we've made the announcement in relation to instant asset write-off. So the government has said to small businesses, 29,000 of whom have failed over the last 2.5 years. That's a record number in our country's history of small business failures. And behind everyone is somebody who's lost their house, somebody who's lost their life savings, somebody who's lost their dream or their job, and this government has nothing to say about it. So what's the government saying to small business? Well, they're going to provide $1,000 for instant asset write-off. Our figure is $30,000, and that will make a big difference to businesses, as well as our $20,000 deduction for businesses, for small businesses to go in and spend money in. I was in Berwick today, where we went to have a bite to eat before this afternoon's function. And the restaurateur there said to me, just sort of a bigger cafe, said, you wouldn't believe how hard it is. And thank goodness you're trying to generate some revenue, some income for us, some support, because I'm in a position where I'm going to have to start putting staff off. And that's the reality for a lot of small businesses. So we've helped a small business with those measures. The government has put in place economic settings which have made it really hard for those businesses to succeed.
7:30, Jim Chalmers gives his budget speech. About 7:50, Angus Taylor says, no, we're not supporting that. Had you predetermined if they offered tax cuts you weren't going to support?
We'd been obviously in the budget lock-up, and we looked at the detail the government had provided, and we looked through options that were available to us, and we took a decision for a government that was going into $1.2 trillion worth of debt, and to offer 70 cents a week in 15 months' time, frankly, was a stunt. And I think they're in the LAW category, and I'd be surprised if the Labor Party wins the election, whether they would ever deliver those tax cuts in any case.
Had you done work on your own income tax cuts?
We had looked at all sorts of options, and honestly, we have, I know there are lots of critics out there, but we have spent 3 years literally going backwards and forwards with the Parliamentary Budget Office, looking at dozens and dozens of policies. We've gone through different iterations around tax, around social policy, around defence policy, economic, and so on and so forth. And we've done a lot of work. We've got a lot of options on the table, and many of them depended on what the budget numbers look like as to how much money we had and what we saw as a priority.
You didn't rule out making cuts to the health and education departments today. Could that occur? How can you ensure it's not frontline services? And what about the ABC? Might you cut the ABC?
Andrew, if you have a look at the figures that are in, and this is a point I made today, the figures in the budget now for health and for education, they are the figures that we commit to. So the same funding, the same spending on health and education, we stick to and we commit to, and I've said that we will legislate for that.
But so you might reprioritise some of that funding as well.
Well, if we find waste in the department where there's not a frontline service being delivered, and don't forget that at a federal level, we don't own a hospital. The federal government doesn't run a school. There are funding agreements that are administered by the department, and the department's grown by literally thousands of people. Now, I want a better understanding of what those people are doing and whether it's helping kids in classrooms. Does it help to employ additional public servants in Canberra with classroom sizes, or with additional support for kids with disabilities and with learning difficulties? I'm happy to be convinced of it, but I suspect that what's happened here is what's happened at a Victorian level and at a Queensland level, where the Prime Minister has ceded to the position of the unions, which is not about service delivery, it's about trying to placate the unions.
There's a lot of critics on your side about the ABC, so what about, would you have a look at their budget?
Well, again, I think the approach that we would take is to reward excellence, and to where we find waste, to cut that waste. And there are a lot of regional services for the ABC which I think are underdone. We were out in Western Queensland just yesterday looking at the devastation of the floods, and the ABC could be a much more integral part of that community, but just having it based in Sydney or just being based in Melbourne is not helping people in outer metro areas or regional areas.
And what about the NDIS? They've got this 8% growth target. Do you think there's enough waste there, or ability to reform it to bring that down? Well,
I've always said that I want to see the NDIS remain sustainable, because it's an important program. And I was always particularly taken by, and I've got family in this situation as well, where you've got ageing parents and adult children with disabilities and the uncertainty about what happens to their kids when the parents pass. So I always thought the NDIS was admirable in its intent in that regard. I worry about the reports that Bill Shorten and others from the Labor Party have put out about organised crime and the waste, and the government's obviously set up a task force. I haven't been briefed in relation to the outcomes of that, and there are probably matters that are under investigation. So I think you'd rely on that advice, but committed to the NDIS, committed to equity for people with disabilities, but against waste and rorts and rackets. And I want to see the money go to frontline services and help those who are most in need.
Do you see this as being a khaki election, given you're heavily rumoured to be about to promote, or promise, should I say, more defence spending?
Look, I think when the Australian public hear their Prime Minister and their Deputy Prime Minister say that we live in the most precarious times since 1945 and then rip $80 billion out of defence, something doesn't add up there. And the thing that gives it away is that the Prime Minister can't even stand up and explain his theory on why these surveillance ships are circumnavigating our country. This hasn't happened in this fashion before. And for the government not to have...
They say they came into Sydney Harbour during Scott Morrison.
But there was an arrangement put in place for that to happen. There were months of planning in relation to that. It's chalk and cheese.
Why did they do? Why did we allow them in there?
Well, there's no problem with an arranged visit, and we have cordial relations with many countries. But to turn up and to start exercises without the government knowing about it, that's a complete abrogation of the Defence Minister's responsibility. And now, of course, today, we've got the Prime Minister saying one thing, the Defence Minister saying another about whether it's Border Force or whether it's Defence or who's got the lead here and who's providing the surveillance. It surely can't be Border Force, which would be farcical. It needs to be the Australian Defence response, and I just think the Prime Minister is projecting weakness at the moment, which has never worked well over history. And so I do think there is an element of who do you trust to keep our country safe, both in a defence sense and also in a local law and order and crime sense at this election. I think that is going to be an integral decision for people to make. On
power bills, it feels like the saving you're going to announce isn't going to be as big as $275 a year. And I think I raised this with you at the press conference the other day. Isn't it more from your point of view, because it's hard to get prices down once they're up, stabilising it? People can't expect from you a massive cut, surely.
So just to deal with the issue just quickly, if I can summarise it this way. Electricity's gone up by 32% under Labor. Gas has gone up by 34% in just 3 years. What they're guaranteeing you, what Anthony Albanese is saying at this election, is that he guarantees you that electricity prices will be higher under Labor and gas prices will be higher under Labor if they're re-elected. What I'm saying to Australians is that we need to change the way in which the system works to bring more gas in, and similarly to what we've done with the 25 cent a litre cut on petrol and diesel to make that cheaper for consumers. That's applied across the economy, not just pensioners and families, but also small businesses and bigger businesses, delivery truck drivers. And that's the approach we've taken to gas as well. It has a downward pressure on prices for commercial users of gas, the big manufacturing companies who are employing hundreds of thousands of Australians, their prices come down. The grocery manufacturers, their prices come down, and that has a delivery of savings to people at the supermarket.
So it might be a small household cut, but across the economy it saves.
Well, I think across the economy you'll see a very significant benefit, and this is why some of the big gas companies are, not happy. But the big energy users, like BlueScope, the biggest manufacturer of steel in our country, is saying, this is a game changer for them. This will bring down the cost of steel, which is exactly what we should be doing because it's such an integral part of housing construction, road construction, infrastructure construction across the country.
The government wants to compare to Donald Trump. Is that hurting you? What did you think of his exchange with Volodymyr Zelensky? What do you think about the fact he might be about to screw us on tariffs? How do you manage this if you become Prime Minister?
Well, I think the Prime Minister will go and he'll throw the lines out. He'll get Jim Chalmers and other lackeys to throw the lines out. Ultimately, what people want is a Prime Minister who can stand up for our country. And what they've seen in Anthony Albanese is somebody who doesn't have the strength or the backbone or the will to stand up for our country's interests. He can't stand up to China at the moment.
So you'd have a fight with Donald Trump?
If I needed to have a fight with Donald Trump or any other world leader, to advance our nation's interests, I'd do it in a heartbeat. And I'll put the Americans on notice and anyone else who seeks to act against our national interest.
Even if it risks AUKUS?
It won't risk AUKUS. AUKUS will survive, there's no doubt in my mind, because there are too many people in the Republican movement, in the Democrat Party, across the aisle, in the House, in the Senate, who strongly support AUKUS. And the other point I'd make, Andrew, is that AUKUS isn't just a one-way street. AUKUS is of mutual benefit to the US as much as it is to Australia. But I'm not going to allow the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom or anyone else to walk over me or to walk over our country. But at the moment, they see a Prime Minister who is weak and flapping in the breeze, and that's why Donald Trump has been able to stand all over Anthony Albanese now. I won't stand for that, and the Prime Minister doesn't have the capacity to stand up for our national interest or for our national security, and the last 3 years have demonstrated that.